The blue lights of the council chamber cast an eerie glow across the faces of the assembled representatives. Deputy Ambassador Maya Cruz stood at the center of the floor, her posture straight and dignified, despite the palpable tension in the air. The High Council of the Galactic Union had convened its quarterly session to discuss colonial expansion rights, and as had been the case for nearly a century, humanity found itself outmaneuvered in the negotiations. The motion to restrict human technological expansion in the Orion Arm is carried by majority vote, announced High Councilor Zexatrol, his 6 appendages gesturing formally. The Vespid's compound eyes reflected the chamber's blue light in fractured patterns as he regarded the human representative with what passed for satisfaction among his kind. The Council recognizes this as a necessary measure to maintain balance among all species of the Union. Maya maintained her diplomatic composure, though a muscle in her jaw twitched slightly. For almost 100 years, since humanity had joined the Galactic Treaty, they had watched their rights and opportunities gradually erode under the weight of bureaucratic restrictions and carefully constructed regulations. What had initially seemed like a magnificent opportunity, joining an interstellar community of advanced civilizations, had slowly revealed itself to be a carefully constructed cage. The human delegation requests permission to address the Council before we conclude today's session. Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the translators embedded throughout the chamber. Councillor Dreth, the Meraxian representative, made a dismissive gesture with one of his tentacles. The voting has concluded, Deputy Ambassador Cruz. Any grievances can be filed through the proper channels and addressed at the next quarterly session. This is not a grievance, Councillor. This is a formal announcement that falls within my rights as a representative. Maya replied, her voice taking on an edge that caused several council members to shift in their seats. Zexatrol's mandibles clicked briefly, in what humans had learned was a sign of irritation. Very well. The Council recognizes Deputy Ambassador Maya Cruz of Earth. You may proceed with your announcement. Maya nodded and activated her datapad. A holographic display appeared above the central platform, showing the official seal of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. On behalf of the United Governments of Earth and all human colonies, I hereby formally announce our intention to withdraw from the Galactic Treaty. She stated, her voice calm but resolute. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from dozens of species began speaking simultaneously, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. Zexatrol's appendages waved frantically as he attempted to restore order. Silence. He finally commanded, his voice amplified by the chamber's systems. The noise gradually subsided, though murmurs continued to ripple through the assembly. Deputy Ambassador Cruz, surely you cannot be serious. The withdrawal process requires years of negotiation and transition planning. Maya's expression remained impassive. I am entirely serious, High Councilor, and you misunderstand. This is not a request for negotiations to begin a withdrawal process. This is a formal notification that all human citizens' assets and technologies will begin evacuation from Union space within 30 days, in accordance with Article 7, Section 12 of the Galactic Treaty, the Emergency Withdrawal Provision. The provision she cited had been included in the original treaty, almost as an afterthought, a clause designed to allow species to rapidly evacuate in the event of natural disasters or existential threats. No species had ever invoked it as a political measure. This is preposterous, Councillor Dreth exclaimed, his skin fluctuating through shades of red and purple. The emergency withdrawal provision cannot be used for political purposes. It was designed for... The provision makes no such distinction, Maya interrupted coolly. It states that any signatory species may enact an emergency withdrawal for any reason they deem necessary for their survival and well-being. Humanity has made this determination. Zexatrol leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous pitch. Deputy Ambassador, surely you realize the economic disruption this would cause. Your species operates key technological infrastructure throughout Union space. This action would be tantamount to sabotage. Not at all, High Counselor, Maya replied. We will be removing only our own citizens and property as is our right. If the Council has become dependent on human innovation and labor, that is not our responsibility. Perhaps the Council should have considered that before systematically restricting human rights and opportunities over the past decades. Representative Vexilor of the Mir Collective, usually silent during Council proceedings, rose from his seat. His crystalline form caught the light, sending prismatic patterns dancing across the chamber walls. The Mir Collective reminds the Council that restricting a species' right to withdraw would violate the foundational principles of the Union, he stated in his melodious voice. However, Deputy Ambassador Cruz, the consequences of such a precipitous action would be severe. I urge your government to reconsider and enter into a dialogue. Maya inclined her head slightly toward the Mir representative. We appreciate the collective's concern, Representative Vexilor. However, our decision is final. Operation Exodus has already begun. Human transport ships are departing from Nexus Station as we speak. Research facilities across Union space are already shutting down operations. The 30-day notice is merely a courtesy. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of the chamber's environmental systems. The implications were beginning to sink in among the Council members. Humans had become integral to the Union's infrastructure, their adaptive technologies filling niches that other species' technologies could not. Their departure would leave countless systems vulnerable. This is blackmail, Dreth finally sputtered. You cannot possibly evacuate all human assets in 30 days. You're attempting to force concessions. Maya's expression hardened. This is not a negotiation tactic, Counselor. This is a declaration of independence. Humanity entered this union in good faith, seeking cooperation and mutual advancement. Instead, we have been systematically marginalized, our innovations restricted, our expansion limited. We have concluded that our future lies in charting our own path. She turned to address the entire chamber. The decision has been made. In 30 days, no human citizen or human-owned technology will remain in Union space. We will establish our own territories beyond the current borders, and any species wishing to establish diplomatic or trade relations with humanity will be welcome to do so on equal terms. With that, Maya deactivated her datapad and turned to leave the chamber. As she reached the exit, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. The council session is adjourned, said Zexatrol weakly, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. Maya allowed herself a small smile as the doors closed behind her. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity throughout Union space. Transport ships moved in carefully coordinated patterns, collecting human citizens from planet stations and outposts across dozens of systems. Research facilities that had been the center of technological advancement for decades were systematically shut down, their equipment packed and removed. On the border station, Horizon's Edge, General Eric Wilson oversaw the evacuation of the human security forces. The human contingent had been responsible for maintaining the border defense network, a sophisticated system of sensor arrays and automated defense platforms that had kept pirates and hostile forces at bay for generations. General, the last transport will be departing in 6 hours, reported his aide, Lieutenant Kara Chen. All essential personnel have been accounted for. Wilson nodded, his weathered face grim, as he studied the holographic display showing the progress of the evacuation. And the defensive systems. As ordered, sir. All systems are operational, but the maintenance protocols and update servers have been removed. The Union forces will have to figure out how to maintain them on their own. Wilson ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. They won't be able to. Not for long. The Vespid engineers never bothered to learn the underlying architecture. They were too busy looking down their mandibles at our primitive technology. He turned to look out the viewport at the stars beyond. It's a shame, really. We could have accomplished so much together if they'd treated us as equals. Meanwhile, On the agricultural world of New Harvest, Professor Sam Baker supervised the final preparations for departure. The planet had been terraformed by humans decades earlier and had become the breadbasket for dozens of Union worlds. Its specially engineered crops, designed to provide nutrition for multiple species, had alleviated food shortages across 3 sectors. "Are we really taking everything?" asked one of the younger agricultural engineers, looking out at the vast fields of golden grain swaying in the breeze. Baker nodded solemnly. "All the seed banks, all the genetic templates, all our research. The Union's Agricultural Council denied our request for expansion rights 7 times in the past decade. They can figure out how to feed themselves now." The engineer frowned. "But some of these worlds will face famine without our harvests." "I know," Baker said quietly. "I've spent my life trying to end hunger across the galaxy. But sometimes people and other species need to learn the hard way about the value of cooperation." He placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "We'll establish new farms in our new territories. And when the Union comes asking for trade agreements, we'll be in a position to demand fair treatment." At Nexus Station, the massive orbital hub that served as the primary transfer point for interstellar trade, the effects of the human withdrawal were already becoming apparent. The station had been built through a collaboration of 7 species, but its environmental systems and adaptive interfaces had been designed by human engineers. Lyanna Mason, one of the few Krell representatives who had consistently advocated for human rights in the Union, watched the departure of another human transport from the observation deck. Her scaled skin shimmered in the starlight as she turned to address the Union officials who had come to plead for a delay. "You've had a century to listen to human concerns," she told them, her normally gentle voice firm. "A century of dismissing their innovations as disruptive, of restricting their colonies to the least desirable systems, of outvoting them on every issue that mattered to their development. Did you really think they would tolerate this treatment forever?" Councillor Dreth, who had been dispatched by the Council in a desperate attempt to slow the evacuation, flexed his tentacles in agitation. "The humans are overreacting to necessary regulatory measures. Their technology advances too quickly. It disrupts the careful balance we've established." Lyanna's jewel-like eyes narrowed. "That careful balance has consistently favored the founding species of the Union. The humans have simply decided they no longer wish to play a rigged game." She gestured toward the viewport, where engineers could be seen removing components from the station's central core. "They're taking only what belongs to them, as is their right. If that leaves gaps in our infrastructure, perhaps we should have valued their contributions more highly while they were here." As the evacuation continued, the first signs of the coming crisis began to emerge. On the outlying world of Ferox Prime, the automated defense systems that had kept the native predators at bay began to malfunction. Without the human technicians who had maintained them, the local administrators were unable to implement the necessary repairs. In the Cygnus sector, pirate activity surged as word spread that the human-operated border patrols were withdrawing. The Union ships dispatched to replace them found themselves outmaneuvered by adversaries who seemed to know the patrol patterns intimately. At Freehaven Station, the largest medical research facility in Union space, patients from dozens of species watched anxiously as human doctors and researchers packed their equipment and departed. The revolutionary medical technologies that had extended lifespans across the Union were being removed, leaving behind only the most basic treatments. 3 months after Maya Cruz's announcement, the Council convened an emergency session that many had begun to call the Final Court. The chamber, once a symbol of interstellar cooperation, now felt hollowed out. Nearly a third of the technical staff that had maintained the Council's systems had been human, and their absence was palpable in the flickering lights and malfunctioning translation systems. High Counselor Zexatrol called the session to order his usually immaculate appearance, now disheveled. Reports from across Union space painted a grim picture. The border defense network was operating at 40% efficiency and declining. Pirate incursions had increased by 300%. Food shortages had begun on 7 worlds, with projections suggesting that number would triple within 6 months. The situation is untenable. Zexatrol admitted, his voice lacking its usual confidence. We must establish contact with the human authorities and negotiate for technical assistance at minimum. Negotiate with what leverage? Demanded Representative Vexlor of the Mur. They have established their new territories beyond our borders. Their defensive capabilities appear intact. Meanwhile, our infrastructure crumbles around us. We have nothing to offer them except the same participation in a system that they have already rejected. The debate raged for hours, with accusations and recriminations flying between representatives. Some called for military action to force the humans to return, a suggestion that was quickly dismissed as both ethically reprehensible and practically impossible, given the current state of Union defenses. As the session seemed to be reaching an impasse, the chamber doors opened to admit a human figure. Greg Walsh, formerly a mid-level diplomat in the Earth Diplomatic Corps, strode confidently to the center of the floor. The council recognizes Greg Walsh, representative of... Zexatrol paused, uncertain of the proper protocol. I represent the newly formed Human Alliance, Walsh supplied smoothly. I've been authorized to engage in preliminary discussions regarding potential cooperation between our peoples. A mix of relief and suspicion rippled through the chamber. You've come at an opportune moment, Representative Walsh, said Councillor Dreth, attempting to regain his diplomatic composure. We have been discussing the unfortunate consequences of your government's hasty withdrawal. Walsh raised an eyebrow. Hasty. After nearly a century of systematic marginalization, I would characterize our response as remarkably patient. He activated a holographic display. But I'm not here to reopen old wounds. I'm here to present data that I believe will be of interest to the Council. The display showed a series of graphs and projections. This is the current state of the Border Defense Network. As you can see, the efficiency is dropping at an accelerating rate. Our analysts project complete failure within 6 months. He swiped to the next display. These are agricultural projections for the 17 worlds, most dependent on crops from new harvest. Without the genetic templates and specialized equipment, crop yields have already dropped by 35%. Within one growing season, that figure will reach 70%. For the next hour, Walsh methodically outlined the cascading failures occurring throughout Union space. Environmental systems, medical technologies, transportation networks, all were showing signs of degradation without human maintenance and innovation. The systems were designed to be maintained by humans, Walsh explained. Not out of any malicious intent, but because our neurology approaches problem-solving differently than other species. We adapt, we improvise, we find unconventional solutions. These qualities that the Council so often criticized as disruptive are precisely what made our technologies effective. Zexatrol's appendages moved in a gesture of concession. We acknowledge the valuable contributions humans have made to the Union. If you are here to negotiate a return... I am not, Walsh interrupted firmly. The Human Alliance has established its independence and has no intention of returning to a subordinate position within the Union. However, we are open to discussing a new relationship, one based on mutual respect and equal standing. The negotiations that followed took place at Freehaven Station, now operating at minimal capacity in the absence of its human medical staff. Representative Walsh, joined by a small delegation of human specialists, met with council representatives, led by Zexatrol and the Krell diplomat Lyanna Mason, who had been asked to serve as a neutral mediator due to her history of fair dealings with humans. The first days were tense, with old grievances threatening to derail the talks before they could begin in earnest. But as reports of worsening conditions throughout Union space continued to arrive, pragmatism gradually replaced pride. The fundamental issue, Walsh explained during one particularly heated session, is that the Union's founding species designed a system that inherently favored their modes of thought and development. humans, and several other newer species were expected to conform to these patterns, rather than contribute their unique perspectives. Liana nodded in agreement. The Krell faced similar challenges when we joined the Union. Our consensus-based decision-making was often dismissed as inefficient by species with more hierarchical structures. Slowly, a new framework began to emerge. The Cooperation and Development Accord would replace the old treaty restructuring governance to ensure that all species, regardless of when they joined, would have equal representation. Technological innovation would be encouraged, rather than restricted, with safeguards focusing on ethical applications, rather than maintaining the status quo. Colonial expansion rights. The issue that had sparked countless disputes would be reassessed based on a species' need and ability to develop territories responsibly, rather than on seniority within the Union. The economic systems that had consistently channeled resources toward the founding species would be reformed to create more equitable distribution. Throughout the negotiations, Union representatives made increasingly generous concessions, hoping to secure human technological assistance before their systems failed completely. Walsh and his team accepted these offers cautiously, insisting on verification mechanisms and phased implementation to ensure that old patterns wouldn't reassert themselves once the immediate crisis had passed. On the agricultural world of New Harvest, a joint team of human and Union scientists began work on restoring the failing crops. Professor Baker, who had reluctantly agreed to return as an advisor, worked alongside specialists from 6 different species. The genetic templates need to be recalibrated for the changing soil chemistry, he explained to a Vespid agronomist who had once dismissed his research as unnecessarily complex. Your people have been harvesting for 3 months without implementing the seasonal adjustments we designed. The Vespid's antennae drooped in a gesture of embarrassment. We did not understand the purpose of these adjustments. Our own agricultural traditions are more static. Baker nodded, his initial resentment softening as he recognized the genuine desire to learn. Different evolutionary histories lead to different approaches. That's why collaboration is so valuable when each side respects the other's contribution. Meanwhile, at Horizon's Edge, General Wilson supervised the repair of the border defense network. Union security forces worked alongside human technicians, learning the maintenance protocols they had previously ignored. The system uses adaptive algorithms that learn from each encounter, Wilson explained to a group of Meraxian officers. That's why it was so effective against pirates, who kept changing their tactics. But the algorithms need regular calibration by engineers, who understand both the technology and the evolving threat patterns. The Meraxian commander, initially skeptical, found herself impressed by the elegance of the human designs. We were taught that human technology was simplistic and brute-forced, she admitted. I'm beginning to see that we were misinformed. Wilson smiled grimly. A convenient narrative for keeping us in our place. But the past is the past. What matters now is building something better. At Nexus Station, engineers from 12 species collaborated to restore the environmental systems to full functionality. The human designs, once disparaged as unnecessarily flexible, were now recognized as brilliantly adaptive, capable of accommodating the atmospheric needs of dozens of different species simultaneously. As the months passed, the crisis gradually stabilized. The new accord took shape, incorporating lessons from the near collapse of Union infrastructure. Representatives from species that had previously been marginalized found their perspectives welcomed in discussions about governance and development. 1 year after Maya Cruz's dramatic announcement in the council chamber, delegates from all Union species and the Human Alliance gathered at Freehaven Station for the formal signing of the new accord. The station, once again operating at full capacity, with a mixed staff of humans and other species, symbolized the new era of cooperation. Maya, now serving as the primary ambassador for the Human Alliance, stood at the center of the gathered dignitaries. Beside her, High Counselor Zexatrol represented the traditional Union leadership. The contrast between this meeting and their last confrontation in the council chamber could not have been more striking. Today marks not an ending, but a new beginning. Maya stated her voice, carrying to all corners of the grand hall. We have learned through difficult experience that true cooperation cannot be built on inequality or suppression of differences. The diversity of our species is not a challenge to be managed, but a strength to be embraced. Zexatrol, humbled by the events of the past year, inclined his head in acknowledgement. The Union failed to honor its founding principles of mutual respect and cooperation. In our desire for stability, we stifled the very innovation and diversity that could have made us stronger. We are grateful for this opportunity to rebuild our relationship on a more equitable foundation. The signing ceremony proceeded with representatives from each species, adding their endorsement to the accord. The document formally dissolved the old hierarchical structure of the Union and established a new galactic alliance based on principles of equal representation and collaborative development. As the ceremony concluded, Maya found herself standing beside Lyanna Mason, the Krell diplomat who had played such a crucial role in the negotiations. "Did you plan it this way?" Lyanna asked quietly, her jewel-like eyes studying Maya's face. "When you announced the withdrawal, did you anticipate this outcome?" Maya smiled slightly. "Not exactly. We hoped for a reassessment of our relationship, but we were prepared for permanent separation if necessary. What we couldn't continue to accept was the status quo." "A calculated risk then," Lyanna observed. "One that nearly ended in disaster for all involved." "Sometimes systems need to fail before they can be truly reformed," Maya replied. "As long as the old structures were functioning well enough for the founding species, there was no incentive for meaningful change." Lyanna's scales shimmered as she considered this. "A dangerous philosophy, but I cannot argue with the results. The alliance that emerges from this crisis may indeed be stronger than the Union ever was." As they spoke, a joint fleet of ships from multiple species could be seen through the station's viewports, preparing for a ceremonial departure to mark the new era of cooperation. The vessels representing both the former Union worlds and the human alliance would conduct a tour of key systems as a symbol of unity and mutual support. General Wilson, who had been speaking with a group of security officials nearby, approached Maya and Lyanna. "The joint patrol fleet is ready, Ambassador. All systems are functioning at optimal levels, and the crews are working together remarkably well." Maya nodded in satisfaction. "Thank you, General. It's a fitting symbol for our new beginning, different species, different approaches, but working toward a common goal." As the diplomatic reception continued around them, Professor Baker joined their small group, his usual stern expression softened by cautious optimism. "The agricultural restoration is proceeding ahead of schedule. The joint research teams have already developed 3 new crop variants that should increase yields by at least 20%. "Better than before the withdrawal?" Maya asked. Baker nodded. "Significantly. It turns out that combining human adaptive techniques with Vespid precision cultivation and mirror crystalline growth theories produces remarkable results. We just needed to start treating each other as equals to see the potential." Maya watched as representatives from species that had barely acknowledged each other a year earlier now engaged in animated discussions about joint projects and shared resources. The path to this moment had been painful and fraught with risk, but the transformation was undeniable. Later that evening, as the formal events concluded, Maya stood alone on an observation deck, watching the ceremonial fleet depart. The ships moved in perfect formation, their lights tracing a path among the stars, like a physical manifestation of the new connections being formed between their peoples. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Greg Walsh approaching. "Congratulations, Ambassador," he said, joining her at the viewport. "I don't think anyone could have predicted such a complete transformation when you stood before the council that day." Maya smiled reflectively. "I'm not sure I deserve much credit. I simply delivered the message. It was the council's reaction that set everything in motion." "Don't underestimate your role," Walsh countered. Your timing was impeccable and your resolve gave courage to other marginalized species. The Mur and the Krell might never have spoken up without your example. Maya nodded thoughtfully, watching as the fleet disappeared into the darkness of space. Perhaps the most valuable lesson for all of us was learning what we truly had to offer one another. The Union saw humans as disruptive, but failed to recognize that disruption is sometimes necessary for growth. And we needed to learn that independence isn't the same as isolation, Walsh added. Our strength comes not just from our own abilities, but from how those abilities complement others. As the last lights of the departing fleet faded from view, Maya turned away from the viewport. The observation deck overlooked the main concourse of Free Haven Station, where humans and members of dozens of other species moved purposefully among shops, research facilities, and gathering places. The station hummed with activity and possibility. "This is just the beginning," Maya said quietly. "There will be challenges ahead, old prejudices to overcome, new crises to face. But for the first time, I believe we're facing them together, truly together, rather than as dominant and subordinate species." Walsh smiled. "A new chapter, then, for all of us." Maya nodded, her expression resolute, yet hopeful as she gazed out at the stars. For all of us. The Human Alliance and the Reformed Galactic Alliance continued to develop their new relationship in the years that followed. There were setbacks and conflicts, as was inevitable, when diverse species with different histories and perspectives attempted to work together. But the fundamental principle established during the crisis, that true cooperation required equality and mutual respect, provided a foundation that proved remarkably resilient. The technological integration that had once made the Union vulnerable to human withdrawal now became a strength as species combined their unique approaches to problem-solving. Human adaptability complemented Vespid precision, mirror theoretical insights, enhanced Krell consensus implementations, and dozens of other synergies emerged as artificial hierarchies dissolved. Maya Cruz would later reflect that the greatest achievement of the withdrawal had not been forcing concessions from the Council, but demonstrating that interdependence could only function when balanced by respect for independence. Sometimes, it seemed you had to be willing to walk away to create the conditions for a truly equal partnership. And as the new alliance expanded into previously unexplored regions of the galaxy, the wisdom of this approach became increasingly apparent. New species they encountered were welcomed not as junior partners to be assimilated into an existing hierarchy, but as unique contributors to an ever-evolving collaborative endeavor. The lesson that had been learned at such great risk, that diversity was a strength rather than a challenge, that innovation flourished in freedom rather than under restriction, that cooperation required equality rather than dominance, became the guiding principle of an interstellar community that would eventually span the galaxy. It had begun with a single human, standing before an alien council delivering news that no one had anticipated. It had continued through a crisis that threatened countless worlds. And it had culminated in a new beginning that honored the unique contributions of all. In the grand tapestry of galactic history, it would be remembered as the moment when true cooperation began, not with a conquest or a compromise, but with the courage to demand respect and the wisdom to extend it in return.